This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks NYC. I had the pleasure of having a longtime software industry veteran hailing out of Seattle. Company was originally out of San Fran. We're going to talk about software. We're going to talk about the growth in youth sports and youth camps. We're going to talk about how B2B software is the place to be. And I'm happy to bring Jeremy Kelstrom from Alaris, who's a client of Integrity Square and has become a good friend. So Jeremy, welcome to your first Halo Talks.
Thanks, Pete. Happy to be here.
So I know you started this company, a short 14 years ago, similar to ours. I think we might have the same anniversary date on what you started. So give us a little background on where you saw the opportunity, why you decided to dig in and dedicate your life to this, and where things are at now.
Yeah, you bet. So try to give you the condensed version. So I started Alaris coming out of graduate school, actually in the recession of 2009. And it was pretty interesting. We were born out of a business plan competition. Rolls-Royce of all companies was the company that put on that competition. We won that. And what it was at the time was a signature recognition technology. And it was acoustic based, so it could listen to the sound of your signature as opposed to an image, which was a really cool, novel technology. I think why we won is we recognized that we couldn't go right after the big markets like credit cards. We had to find an entry point. And for us, we settled on childcare as that entry point. But quickly, as we got into childcare, we realized that was a tough business to scale, state by state licensing, all that. And so we stumbled into working with our very first YMCA back in the day. And they said, hey, we've got this thing we call Kids Club. And so that was unlicensed. We put our signature tech in there, built a really nice, simple user interface, tablet-based check-in experience around that. And they loved it. And then we said, well, hey, what can we improve? They said, the one thing we don't love is the signature technology. And so we're like, oh, wonderful. Our core technology you don't love.
Right.
So we, after a lot of years of trying to make the signature work, we decided to make a tough decision and pivot away from that. And we went kind of all in on that. And so we really took off at the time because it was super niche. Nobody had done just Kids Club check-in. And so from there, we then got into, lots of other regular health clubs. Mountainside Fitness was our first. But the big piece there was that we stayed true to our roots and what made us successful with getting the Kids Club application in place. And then we extended that to things like youth camps, after school care, group fitness tracking. And so we've really expanded now into a full booking and check-in management platform.
So a couple of questions. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, because we've got a lot of entrepreneurs on the phone here. Dave and I have also been, entrepreneurs, and that I wrote down as before you said it, but like that pivot, it's sometimes hard to swallow when you're like, hey man, like we got this resident knowledge, like maybe the market just doesn't understand it. And then say like, look, customer feedback is telling us something and I'm not going to like rest on my laurels and be like, you're wrong, I'm right. And I've had some of those issues in the past where we've developed the software based on where we think the market's going versus what the market's telling us they want. So can you just like kind of expand on that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in hindsight, we should have pivoted way earlier. My personality is definitely one of like tenacity. I'm going to make this thing work, but we should have listened to the market sooner. And it was a really tough decision because here we had 5 patents. It was the whole reason we started the business in the first place. But to your point, the market was just like, meh, we don't really care. And it was kind of this technology trying to find a home. And so I think the real lesson there for entrepreneurs is, if you have a tech that you're going out and saying, hey, please like this thing, your chances of success are minimal versus if you come to a market, find that need and build for that, product market fit, light years ahead of your opportunity to, be successful. And so I think that was the big lesson we learned there, was really keeping a pulse on what the market actually wanted and being a more customer product driven focus.
Yeah. So we just launched something called a 2-minute drill. I don't know if you've seen it on LinkedIn, but every Wednesday we do 2-minute drills. So this is what revenue is, expenses, return on ad spend, EBITDA, and every week we're going to launch a new one. So what I'd like to do is Dave, we're going to turn this segment right here that we just did into a 2-minute drill on the pivot. And we're going to edit that as the pivot. And then we're gonna splice in what I'm gonna ask you now, and then we'll have like a podcast and a 2-minute drill by Alaris. When you think about the pivot and you say, all right, I'm listening to clients of what they want, but I'm also actually like they're identifying to me what their frustration is, and they think that I could solve it. So could you kind of just expand on what was their frustration with Kids Club, and how did you kind of dig in and say, now let's reset the process, or I get what you're doing. Let me give you a system to do it the way you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So for us, what we recognized first, their frustration was they were doing everything on paper, and there was really no software out there that did exactly what they needed. You either had a full-blown childcare management software that was totally overkill, or you had these sort of afterthought Kids Club check-in experiences that the member management systems have built just to try to help the customers, but not really understanding the pain. So I think the big thing we did was actually I think I'm going to say I spent a good 2 months actually in the environment, living, breathing what they go through. And that's where all of our product ideas came from. And I think what you're alluding to as well that you have to be careful of is taking the customer fully at face value and instead making patterns. So hearing their frustration, but translating that to actual scalable software. Versus we made that mistake sometimes where one customer was adamant they had to have this one feature, and we just took that at face value instead of trying to step back and see how that fit into the whole picture.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate that. So as you've kind of gotten through COVID, everyone's up and running operations. Some things have become more important than others. I think, cycling used to be, a go-to on people's calendars from a group exercise. Everyone kind of, might have cycled their way out of COVID. Some people weren't able to bring back a lot of their instructors. So what's been the focus, or what's been the inherent growth in the daycare, in the kids' youth sports performance, in the camps that, groups have said, hey, this is a great use of square footage inside and outside of our locations, and it could become a very material revenue stream with not any incremental CapEx.
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID was, for us, a really scary time because our software was purely used when people were at the club. So navigating that is probably a whole separate Halo talk. But in terms of the positives that came out of the COVID experience was obviously a renewed sense of the importance of health, not only for adults, but also kids. And the other was maximizing other revenue streams outside of the walls of the club. And so for a lot of clubs, that was like camp-oriented programming that, because during COVID, you could still run things outdoors. So we were fortunate that a lot of our customers were leaning on us to help them manage those outdoor programs. So that was a big area that we saw a lot of growth in. And that's ultimately what led to our newer platform we call our bookings app. And so initially we were just doing check-in management, but with the expansion of those programs, we pivoted also into like being able to offer these things online. And so I think those two things, sort of the renewed focus on health and this sort of need for additional revenue streams and then outdoor programming really was a second growth for our company.
Now, obviously in any software, which I've been involved in, probably one too many, the sales cycle is always something that you think is much quicker than is rational. So, as you get into some of these clients like a YMCA, a JCC, an EOS Fitness, a Mountainside, and I'll make up a new term here that might become like, Jeremy and I kind of, co-trademark this term, but, you kind of run it like a piggyback SaaS gross model here, because you're basically growing off of clients that you spent a significant amount of time with. And when they add a new location, they're not bidding out, like, let's figure out what software we're going to put in, right? They're going to be like, hey, click on another, club, user ID in there. So talk about maybe like how you've benefited from that, maybe how more connected you've been, and how people rely on you as kind of part of a mission critical launch. Like, you can't really launch without me anymore.
Right. Yeah. No, it's You're absolutely right. And on the sales cycle front, in the early days, obviously that was a lot longer. And that was a couple factors. One, it was, being an unproven company. The second was just, a lot of these companies were really kind of trying to time that with maybe a transition to a new member management system, or just really kind of dragging their heels in general. But yeah, once we were able to get in with these groups, the sales cycle is like significantly reduced. And I think kind of this new term we're coming up with maybe is related to like kind of this land and expand approach, right? Where once you get into that customer's environment, you prove that you are a true partner, not just a vendor. That like confidence boost translates into them being very willing to expand with you. And to your point, with a lot of our member management partners, that's been a big focus for us, is really being great partners with them, like an ABC Fitness, a Club Automation. And their confidence has increased so much that they rely on us, to your point, as mission critical. And so there are lots of deals we're brought in on where it is just said to the customer, hey, you can't use our software unless you get Alaris. Right. So that's been a testament to, I think, both our partnerships with the clubs themselves, but also the member management partners.
Yeah. Now, as you take a look at, and just to kind of educate some people on, if they're starting up a new software company in any kind of niche of the industry, how important is it for you when you walk into a new client, and to be able to say, hey, here's all my partners on the membership management side. That's already taken care of. You don't have to worry about us APIing like we're on a bat phone with them, if you will. In addition to that, if you're running some of these larger entities, which 5 or 10 years ago may have not have been like an aha moment for anyone, but if you say to me, hey, I'm powering Mountainside, which is owned by Garnet Station. I'm powering EOS, which is owned by another private equity firm, BRS. I'm powering the YMCAs, which seem to have somewhat unlimited donation capital. How much does that kind of change the discussion, and how does it make the reference check component of this to kind of like fast track new prospects onboarding versus what you used to deal with, which you and I used to deal with, like probably a lot of trips on Southwest Airlines and like multiple demos in any which way.
Yeah. No, I mean, the references are massive, and I would say the member management integrations are probably one of our biggest differentiators, quite honestly, because there's other, somewhat at least substitute competition to what we do. And that, once people realize they would have to run another system as a standalone versus having a fully integrated experience, it's really a no-brainer. So that has been massively powerful. And that, for us, that's why we focus so heavily on getting all those integrations. And not only just having tight integrations with a few, but with many, also instills confidence, because the reality is a lot of these clubs are constantly kind of thinking, hey, should I go here? Well, oh, good to know, if I switch from this to that, Alaris is integrated with both, so no problem there. So that's been big. But then, having those strong brands as reference points has also been just incredibly powerful in the early days. Again, to your point, like just proving over and over, showing up on site, spending all this time, that has significantly reduced, especially on, in the YMCA side, when you can say you've got the big guys like a Greater Houston YMCA, it's just an immediate sort of like, you are worthy. And then I think on the club side, like an EOS, like a Choose, that are customers, that's been great. And one pretty interesting experience when we first got the California Family Fitness Group, who's of course now In Shape, they asked us a question. They said, well, okay, we always like to ask, give us a customer that you currently have that's happy with you, but we also want to talk to somebody who left you and understand why. And at that time, we had some great reference points, but I actually couldn't give them a reference of somebody that left us because we had never lost a customer.
That's good.
So that was pretty cool experience. Now COVID changed that a little bit, but pre-COVID we had in our, I think it's 7 years at that time, had never lost a customer.
Yeah. So, look, from a standpoint of size of your business, you got a lot of ground to potentially capture. One of the things, as an analogy, when ABC Financial, probably 4 or 5 years ago, changed their name to ABC Fitness. I personally was kind of surprised by that because I'm like, why would you kind of limit yourself like out of my Halo, acronym? Like you could do day spas, you could do hair cutting, you could do massage, you could do all these other things. And they came to the conclusion like, hey, actually fitness globally is big enough and there's plenty of runway and plenty of revenue and plenty of EBITDA to capture. So, when you think about where you are versus where you can be, are you in 5% of what you think is available? Are you in 10%? I mean, you haven't really gone global yet, to speak of. So how do you think of that? If I was to say, hey, I want to get involved here as an investor, or hey, where are you at? Like, what inning are you really at? What would be the answer to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the reality is, although we do have a strong footprint, in the North America market, I think we're really just scratching the surface of what our potential is. I think what we're really seeing, we're really growing the check-in management side, but now that we have this bookings platform, we just completed a brand new, complete upgrade to our entire system. So we're on the latest, greatest technology now. We're finding that, the member management partners, that it's tough for them to be all things to all people, and they have, a lot of legacy features. And so we're finding more and more that there's a big demand to bring in Alaris to help round out their feature set. And so I'm seeing most of the growth around that is being able to offer these new features around the bookings platform. And really kind of our pitch and our vision, if you will, is really being that second software partner. A trend I've been seeing over the years is that health clubs have been struggling to find sort of the best of breed product in each of these functional areas, but then they're left with like 30 different software vendors. None of them are talking to each other. So what we're trying to do is consolidate those software partners that they have and kind of just get you down to your two core main systems.
Gotcha.
And so like member management and us. And we're really seeing that feedback being well received in the market.
Got it. Look, you could have taken in a boatload of institutional capital, run in the red for several years, kind of like talk with private equity, like, hey, I just grew my revenue. Like, doesn't matter what my EBITDA or cash flow is. Obviously you've been very prudent and methodical about that. Talk about like what's in your DNA on why you did it that way and how you feel now, given that you're running a profitable SaaS business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's not to, compare myself to Bezos, but I think it is, can be likened to Amazon, where we really focused on the product experience. We weren't focused on profitability. We wanted to get the product market fit down. And we could have taken shortcuts and, done more of like a payments play or whatnot, where we could have gotten revenue, but we really focused on the customer experience, making sure the product was right. And I think the other thing that we did differently than other groups out there is we focused on what I would call a bottom-up approach. A lot of times people just focus on making the CFO happy or the CEO happy, but then those decisions trickle down to their staff. And oftentimes there's a misalignment and the frontline staff are frustrated, and that ultimately bubbles back up and then you lose that customer. But we focused on really making sure that ground level employee, who, by the way, has lots of great feature ideas, is happy. And by doing that and focusing on that, I think that's what's led to the product that we have today and ultimately has now allowed us to become profitable.
And there's two more questions here before we end our first podcast. What's your team look like? And, how do they feel about where you are and where you're going, from a growth trajectory?
Yeah. Yeah, the team's excited. We're a lean team for sure. We've purposely done that. We have a great tech group that does all of our software. Like I mentioned, we have all the latest, greatest technology. Proud to say we are actually have more females in the group than males. So some of you out there will appreciate that. But yeah, I would say the team's really excited, especially coming out with this new platform and just ready to go to the next phase of the company.
Great. And then my last question, which probably should have been my first or second question, is the name Alaris. How did that come to be?
Yeah, it's kind of a cool origin. You heard me mention that we were founded with Rolls-Royce as our partner, and a little known fact: a lot of people think Rolls-Royce only made cars, but they're actually more known for jet engines.
Yeah, sure.
And so what we were trying to think about. We wanted to pay homage to Rolls-Royce when we founded the company. And so we went through kind of an ideation experience of different words. And so a word we came across called Alaris is a Latin-rooted word, which means to take flight. And so we thought, well, what a cool way as a startup, we're trying to take flight, but then we're also paying homage to Rolls-Royce as a jet engine company. Yeah. So that's the origin of it. And we just iterated on that until we found a word we liked, Alaris instead of Alaris. So, yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well, great. Well, look forward to seeing you at URSA HFA this year. Been tracking your growth and your credibility and success in the industry. So congrats for building that up over a 14, 15 year period of time. I think it was Paul Schauer that at ABC, I did one of our first interviews, and he's like, ABC, we're a 38-year overnight success. And he kind of like, laid back and chuckled, but it was like all hand-to-hand combat, basically, by going around and being like, hey, look, you got to trust me with your data. You got to trust me that I'm going to actually send money, into your account, out of Little Rock, Arkansas, so that's how that started. So congrats on building what you built, and, look forward to checking in with you on more success.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. Really appreciate you having me.
You got to go Halo, baby.